Oh, I see. Carry on. I nodded. Right, anyways, once they finished up bonking their bastards, our own bastards decided to act up again. They tried to do a coup, and the Gaunt were once again embroiled in a civil war. Humanity helped us out of it in the form of U.S. intervention. The New News and Alumara were against it. Wanted to let nature take its course, I guess. Humanity convinced them, though. But our bastards have kept trying, and the humans' bastards are still lurking, waiting for their chance. Hell, the fourth pacification war isn't even technically over yet. Been about 18-19 years now, he said with a shrug. The U.S. is currently at war? I asked. No, not technically. It's more along the lines of putting down a mutiny or a riot suppression. I think the official term's police action. About 18 or so years ago, our bastards tried again and nearly succeeded. It was an extremely organized effort. They had managed to infiltrate the Gaunt government and every ship in 10th Fleet. When they struck, they managed to kill most of our democratically elected representatives and steal most of 10th Fleet's ships in the biggest mutiny in all of our shared histories. Whoa, I said in shock. Yeah, and to top it off, they had begun a propaganda campaign to convince the U.S. to stay out of the conflict. So when the U.S. inevitably entered the fray, 'cause they stole those ships, a lot of the people in charge were suddenly getting angry letters and phone calls from people who'd fallen prey to the propaganda. Wow, what changed? I asked. The U.S. liberated a Gaunt colony from the bastards. Turns out bastards do what bastards do no matter what's at stake. They had been abusing the populace something fierce. Mandatory work schedules and curfews, and capital punishment for minor infractions. Pretty much turned the populace into slaves and killed anyone who tried to argue with them. Once the news broke, their support dried up right quick. Then it was just a matter of killing them as the opportunity arose. But the humans really stepped up to bat for us. If it weren't for them, we'd all have ended up living like those poor bastards on that colony. And it was mostly the humans who laid down their lives, too. We owe them a lot. Yeah, I can imagine. You say killing them? What about prisoners? I asked, dreading the answer at this point. Oh, sure, there's a few of them. But it's kind of a gaunt thing to not be taken alive. Warrior culture and all that. Personally, I prefer the engineering focus of our culture. But if my back was to the wall, I'd rather give my life for something I believe in by taking a few of the bastards with me, I'm sure they probably feel the same way, he said with a shrug. I sighed with relief. Rules of war are important, but the rules regarding police action are a moral imperative. You can tell a lot about a culture by how they handle their police actions. Still, it's not surprising that this was left out of the briefing. One thing was still bothering me, though. You said the human bastards are still lurking. What did you mean? I asked carefully. Well, most human systems pretty much worship the free market. I don't blame them. The thought of being told that you can't buy or sell something that people want to buy is infuriating. But the biggest side effect of a free market is powerful corporations. The more powerful the corporations get, the more they get into politics, and the harder it is to keep them in check. Without strict regulations, you end up having to kill the bastards to get their hands off your throat. Really? I asked. Oh yeah, human corporations are notorious. They even hire mercenaries and go to war with each other. Of course, they do that in areas that the humans' laws don't quite apply, so that they can't be punished for it. Why doesn't the U.S. intercede? I asked, dumbfounded. The U.S. is a protective government. It's not the place of the U.S. to regulate its member species in their own systems. We've got a Senate and a judicial system, but our laws only apply to matters that impact all of the member species, like first contact or joint developed technologies, interspecies trade, or expansion. It also maintains the military, as you already know. Our members ain't allowed to have their own spacefaring militaries, just police. Otherwise, each species governs itself however it wants to. The Nunu have a purely democratic government, and the Gaunt has a democratic republic. The Alumara and humans have a bunch of governments all working under a unified umbrella government. Those ones get complicated. I laughed and said, I know. That was in my brief. I'm sure it was, he laughed in return. Anyways, let's get this tour finished up and get you to Admiral Hecat. We stopped by more impressive areas aboard the Thanatos while I digested what I had just heard. It was a lot to take in. On the one hand, I can definitely see why the US had developed their weapons to be as lethal as they are. On the other hand, I'm not sure how comfortable I am around them, knowing how quickly they resort to violence. Still, it wasn't as if the Oyan were much different. It would seem that we'd gotten lucky with our neighbors. Or unlucky, maybe. If we'd ended up with more bastards, we might not have lost as many against the OU as we have, but we would have probably lost even more to each other. After showing me an absolutely beautiful mess hall, my gaunt guide finally took me to the command room. Just outside the room, he stopped and turned to me. Well, this here ends my guided tour of the USS Thanatos. Inside this door's the command room, and just beyond that's the bridge. Admiral Heckett would probably like to give you the tour of those, and since he's my boss's boss's boss, his preferences matter a whole bunch, he laughed. Anyways, about what we were talking about earlier, I'd much appreciate it if you didn't tell nobody that I'm the one who clued you in, Admiral Fleet Leader, sir. My beak is sealed. Thanks for the tour, I replied. No problem, sir. Well, here we go, he said as he stepped forward to open the door. I followed him and was stunned by the room we were entering. There were screens and seats and tables and desks all over the place, but somehow it didn't feel the least bit cluttered. There weren't any visible cables, and the decking was all in the proper place. It was like a completely different world from all the command centers I'd ever been in, and it was much quieter. Officer on deck! Every single person in the room stood up straight with their left hand at their side and the other touching their forehead, a form of salute. I was touched. My gaunt guide paused for a moment in surprise before quickly turning around and mimicking the gesture. Admiral Heckett was standing in the center of the room, trying his best to suppress what appeared to be a smile. He walked up to me and outstretched his hand. I recognized the gesture from the briefing. A handshake, a sign of mutual respect that had been a human tradition for millennia. Quite the honor. As I took his hand, he said, "It's a pleasure to meet you, Fleet Leader Onaya. I am Admiral Heckett. Welcome aboard the USS Thanatos." After we shook hands, he grinned and whispered, "You're supposed to say at ease to get them to stop." "Oh, at ease," I replied. Everyone went back to their tasks, noticeably louder this time. From behind the Admiral, I saw a screen portraying the hallway I had just been in. Ah, I see. Theatrics. I looked back at the Admiral, now knowing that this man was cut from the same cloth as I. Admiral Heckett turned to my gaunt guide and said, "That will be all, Ensign Plenus." "Yes, Admiral, sir," the Gaunt replied with a salute and a shocked expression. It was good to finally know his name. I had been a little embarrassed to ask. Plenus had been in the hangar when my shuttle docked. I had sent my aides on ahead so I could get a good view of the impressiveness of the hangar when he had approached me and offered a tour without introducing himself. It was also good to know that the Admiral knew the crew. Actually, judging from his expression and how quickly he performed his about face, the Admiral knowing his name and rank came as a surprise to Plenus. It reminded me of a fleet leader I came up under. Fleet Leader All-Seeing Arun. She had made a point of knowing everything that went on in her fleet, and keeping tabs on everything she possibly could. It was unnerving to have her ask how your family was by name. "Well, Fleet Leader, how did you find the tour?" Heckett asked. "I enjoyed it immensely. This ship contains many surprises," I replied. Then I remembered something that had been nagging at me since we entered the system. I noticed that your fighters have a certain artistic elegance that the rest of your ships, well, lack. Why is that? The Admiral laughed. The fighters occasionally have to enter atmospheres and as such must be aerodynamic. The warships don't have to, and as such are designed with function rather than form in mind. Actually, fun fact, the reason that our carriers are as bulbous as they are is because the first one ever made was carved from an asteroid. Really? I asked. Our first battleship was carved from one as well. Yes, I suspect it's probably a commonality among spacefaring species to improvise building materials. In our case, we had already hollowed out the asteroid to use as space station but found ourselves needing a carrier more than a space station. A few modifications and the human spaceship Aurora was finished and able to carry 8 destroyers. Saved us a ton on FTLD fuel. "I bet," I replied. The Admiral nodded before continuing. "The HSS Aurora was retired when the United Systems was officially founded. It was summarily decommissioned and now serves as a museum for the First Contact Wars. We've since obviously improved upon the original design and no longer use improvised materials. Indeed. So why do the battleships look like sticks? Did you manage to find an overly large tree and get it into space? I asked. Hackett laughed. No, the battleships are almost entirely hardpoints. The first modern U.S. battleship created was the USS Hingra, which is Spear of Justice in common Alumara. It was intended to be a fleet killer, and for quite a while it was. But war escalates, and after 36 years of hard service, the Hingra was lost with all hands in the First Battle of Seoul. Your Civil War? I asked. Yes, one of them. Hackett laughed again, but with a grimness this time. You've had more than one? I asked, shocked. Oh, humanity has been having civil wars since we first picked up sticks. We've only had two that the United Systems military was obliged to intervene in, though. I believe you were briefed on the second one. The first one only lasted 18 days, and that's the one that we lost the Hingra in. I licked the upper innards of my beak. As a person, I was shocked to hear the human speak of his bloody history so casually. But as a fleet leader, I was able to appreciate the candor and detached approach. We have warrior species in the Republic, but the humans didn't really look the part. Well, until they smiled wide and showed their teeth. I'm sad to hear that your history has been riddled with strife, Admiral. But I am grateful to be fighting the Omni-Union beside those as experienced in warfare as yourselves. It fills me with confidence that we'll be able to finally put an end to this mechanical threat once and for all. The Admiral smiled wide. We will, one way or another. Speaking of which, we have officially launched the invasion. Really? I asked. What did you send? 6 fleets, so 30 million ships. And the Dreadnought, he replied. Ah, so your fleets really are 5 million ships each. And sorry, what is a Dreadnought? I asked. Honestly, I thought it was the first thing you would ask about. It should have been in your briefing. The USS Nidhogg? There are parts of the briefing I haven't had a chance to skim through yet. I mostly went through the species description and history, I replied, gesturing in an apologetic way. Understandable. I haven't been able to read the briefing supplied by the Republic at all, he said with a laugh. Then his face turned serious. The USS Nidhogg is the only Dreadnought-class ship in the U.S. military. It is a xenocide deterrence created in response to the Deluran War. It has the ability to destroy solar systems, and can withstand significant fire from a fleet of battleships for an extended duration. He looked into my eyes as he said, It is the single most powerful death machine that the United Systems has ever created. It is only cleared for usage if the enemy is xenocidal or mechanical. Every crewman aboard the Nidhogg has passed through the most intense background and psychological checks available to make certain they are loyal to the United Systems. If their loyalty wavers in a detectable way, they are assigned elsewhere. I swallowed heavily. After seeing their ships and hearing their history, I suspected that they might have created weapons of mass destruction that could destroy planets. Such weapons were, of course, prohibited from being researched in Republic space, but for the U.S. it just made sense. Solar systems, though. Why? Insanity. Sheer and utter craziness. Although, I could see it as a xenocide deterrence. The Republic hadn't had an actual xenocidal incident among our member species and hadn't realized that that was what was happening with the OU. I suppose if we had, we would have come up with something similar as a deterrence. Or tried to. I see, was all I could say. From officer to officer, I'm ashamed of the Nidhogg, Hackett said as he looked away. It shows that we're willing to throw away our morals and honor for the sake of survival. I had hoped that it would never be used. Still, I'm glad that it's machines that we might be using it against instead of organics. I see how it is, sir. A voice came from a nearby intercom. Non-sentient machines, I mean. Hackett corrected himself with a smile. Fleet leader, meet Tim, a human-created AI. This was more familiar territory. I'd already received my shock when I read the reports of the human-made AI. They were said to act more like people than machines, and judging from the comedic timing of this one, that may turn out true. I looked at the intercom and said, Pleasure to meet you, Tim. Pleasure to meet you as well, sir. I just popped in to inform you both that we have finished the installation of the TAC maps on the Republic fleet ahead of schedule, Tim said. Thank you, Tim, Hackett replied. You should thank Omega. Running those logistics would have made my head spin right off. If I had one. No thanks necessary, another voice, presumably Omega, replied. Indeed, Omega was simply performing his duty, a third voice said. Fleet leader, meet Omega and John. They are also AI, Hackett said, trying to maintain his composure. Pleasure to meet you both. I am Fleet Leader Onaya of the Republic. Two holograms appeared out of a nearby table. One was a figure wearing a black cloak and holding a curved blade. The other was a figure wearing the same suit of armor that I had seen some soldiers wearing during my tour. The soldiers had been dark blue or dark green, but this suit was white, or perhaps steel with a lot of light shining on it. Judging from your reaction, you've already been briefed on us, the cloaked figure said with Omega's voice. Good. Of course he's been briefed, Omega. Blindsiding a captain is unprofessional, but blindsiding an admiral is downright insubordinate, the other avatar said. John, by process of elimination. It wasn't unprofessional, John. We simply didn't have the time to brief Yulina on our existence before we had to debrief him. Our reactions afterward were the unprofessional part, Tim's voice said with a chuckle. I looked around for Tim's avatar to no avail. My eyes met Hackett's and he shook his head as if he knew what I was looking for. Tim doesn't use an avatar to communicate, the Admiral said. I nodded and asked, Why not, Tim? Well, mostly because I don't... Oh, sorry. It looks like the explanation will have to wait, came the reply. Enemies inbound. Big group of them, John said. We've begun patching FTLDs, but not all of them will be done by the time they enter the system, Omega added. Understood, Hackett replied. Well, Fleet Leader, looks like it's our time to shine. I joined him at larger-than-normal table that displayed a TAC map. The U.S. fleets were shown in blue, the Republic's were in green. I tapped part of the table and an interface popped up. I keyed in a communication frequency and the ID for my comms implant as I watched Hackett do the same. From here, we would be able to give orders to our fleets. Well, Admiral, I said, let's defend your system. Tim, how many do we have left? I asked. 29,683,271 remaining. We have destroyed 8,471,282. 283, 284, 286, Tim replied. Right, I get it. Well, let's keep at it. The Omni Union had attacked about 10 minutes after Tim had told me that our invasion had begun. Not all of our ships had the chance to apply the FTLD patch, but the Valor had. The AI that insists on following me around does have its uses. Despite the patch, we were ordered to defend the Thanatos. All 10 frigates and 100 fighters were deployed in a defense perimeter. The USS Valor, Pride, Shield, Rosenthal, Spear, Gambler, Grateful Carnivore, Bulk, and the freshly repaired Sword. I rolled my eyes when I remembered the Bulk. We've really got to find a better way to name our ships. The way it currently works is that the engineering crew that constructs the ship gets to name it, so long as the name isn't already taken or profane. There's an entire quality assurance team of over 100,000 individuals from different cultures to make certain that the engineering team doesn't get too clever with puns. Like the phallic phalanx, for example. If you didn't speak any Latin, that would seem to be a military maneuvering tactic. The QA team had a tough time on that one because most translators get confused with it. Both words are Latin but are also technically part of the English language, so a translator would read phallic phalanx as phallic phalanx. The only way it didn't slip the net was that nobody knew what it meant, so they had to check the definition of phallic and phalanx. The phrase phallic phalanx, as it turns out, means a formation of shield-carrying soldiers in the overall shape of a penis. This situation made interplanetary news because it ended up costing enough to make it the most expensive dick joke of all time. Target identified. Firing, Babinin said in a bored tone. We were ordered to hold position and target anything that targeted our formation. We took this to mean anything that looked like it might start targeting our formation. Even so, the Omni Union was painfully unaware that the Thanatos was currently host to the commanders of the Joint Fleet. Admiral Hackett and Fleet Leader Onaya had both taken up residence on the Thanatos in an attempt to better coordinate the fleets. Hackett had said that he liked the ship more than the science station. The importance of our assignment didn't make me feel any better about not being in the thick of it, though. especially once the casualty notifications started rolling in. Kill confirmed. No further targets, Bebanin reported with a slight yawn. The Loalana was still docked. If things went south, the plan was to have the fleet leader board the Loalana and have Yulina do his best to evacuate him. It was certainly a last-ditch plan, though. If things go badly enough that the Thanatos is at risk of destruction, there's almost no chance the Loalana's getting away. A message notification brought me back to reality. Permission to pursue fleeing target. Captain Samuel's USS Sword Reynolds had made me squad leader for all 10 ships. I had expected some pushback because most of the captains are more tenured than I am. But everyone had done exactly as they were told without a single complaint. Well, a single complaint to me anyway. Samuel's, on the other hand, wasn't more tenured than I am. As a matter of fact, she just received this command 3 months ago, which is probably why her ship was the only casualty in the second assault. No, that's not quite fair. Nobody really believes that an enemy will kamikaze until it happens. Denied. Hold formation. Our job is to protect the Thanatos. Killing the enemy is just a treat we get for doing so. Captain Wong, USS Valor. I'm going to die of boredom, Bebanin, I said. I could give you access to a copy of the Alumara Renegade, sir, Tim chimed in with a literal chiming sound. Wasn't talking to you, Tim, and I hate romance novels, I replied tersely. Ah, but you know about it. What, read it already or something? Everyone knows about the Alumara Renegade, a trashy smut novel that the author wrote to expand his horizons. It ended up becoming more popular than his more serious works. Every author's worst nightmare, I said with a chuckle. Now get back to work, you bucket of bolts. Aye, sir, the AI responded. Then after a second of silence, I do want to point out that I don't have any buckets or bolts, though. Can it? Lieutenant Bebanin chuckled at the exchange and said, Well, sir, dying of boredom isn't all that bad. It could be worse. As he said that accursed phrase, I watched 2 enemy destroyers on the TAC map turn to target us directly. I nearly got my mouth open to say something about it when 2 friendly Mac rounds began sailing toward the enemies at unbelievable speeds. I glared pointedly at Bebanin, who saw the exact same thing I did. Don't do that again, Lieutenant, I said. Aye, aye, sir, he said with a smile. I leaned back in my chair, finally accepting my fate as a spectator. The previous battle had a significantly different tone to it. Well, if you could call that a battle. It had been closer to a very quick slaughter. They jumped into the system and were destroyed before they could get a single round off. Scuttlebutt had said that the OU were basing their attacks on how many ships we had in the system, so everyone was expecting the last fight to end fast. We had been dreading this one, though, with good reason. Nearly 40 million ships had warped into the system and immediately began attacking. But by now, most of the fleet had finished the FTLD patch and were warping with wild abandon, which caused the casualty notifications to slow down significantly. These robotic bastards definitely didn't account for that. Sol was going to get a massive economy buff after all this fighting. Mars and Titan both had the tech to unpack the balls of atoms that were left over from the A2 cleanup.